Get ready. Here's how you make a cinnamon swirl artisan sourdough loaf. Start by mixing together 325 grams of water and 120 grams of active sourdough starter. I like to mix these together first to make sure that the starter is really evenly distributed. Then add 400 grams of bread flour, I use King Arthur unbleached, and 100 grams of whole wheat flour. Then add 10 grams of salt, and we're gonna mix all of that together with your dough whisk. If you're not a fan of whole wheat flour, you can remove that and just do all 500 grams of bread flour. Also, I always forget to film this part, but to make your sourdough starter the night before, you'll mix together 15 grams of starter, 75 grams of water, and 75 grams of bread flour. That should be peaked and ready to use for this recipe in the morning. After doing the initial mixing with the dough whisk, I like to move to my hands. This just makes sure that everything gets super incorporated, and I also will strengthen the dough here at the very beginning. I do this for 4-ish minutes usually. I do slap and folds, I knead it, sometimes I stretch and fold the dough. I'm just working the dough really well at the outset to start building that strength. We're gonna cover this up for 30 to 60 minutes before we come back for stretch and folds. Don't forget to set out your 4 tablespoons of butter for our mixture later so that it's nice and soft. And I like to go ahead and feed my starter. You could start fresh with a clean jar. I wanted to reuse this one, so I just scraped everything out so that I could weigh 20 grams of starter, 100 grams of water, and 100 grams of flour. That's a 1 to 5 to 5 feeding ratio, which means it'll be peaked before bed if I want to do any kind of overnight sourdough recipes. Bagels are my favorite. Also, sandwich bread is really good. Anyway, back to the bread. This is our first round of stretch and folds. The dough has sat and relaxed, and now we're gonna come in and start some dough strengthening. I wet my hands and lift up the dough, then set it back down on top of itself. I rotate the bowl about a quarter turn, and I just keep doing this until the dough really resists me and doesn't want to stretch anymore. This usually is like 8 to 10 stretch and folds or so. Just do it until your dough tells you that it's done being stretched. This makes sure that you are strengthening your dough as much as possible. We're gonna cover it up, let it rest for another 30 to 60 minutes, wet our hands, and come back in for round 2. We're just doing the same thing, stretch and folds as many times as we need until the dough really resists. You don't wanna pull so high that the dough rips or tears. We're just trying to help build some gluten and some structure to the dough. Stretch and folds also have other benefits that I feel a lot of people don't know about. It's not talked about that much. Number 1 is ingredient distribution. So if there are any bits of flour or starter or salt that didn't get incorporated very well, this is giving them a chance to kind of make their way around the bowl. This is round 3, by the way. Another benefit is temperature regulation. If there are parts of the dough that are getting warmer than others, maybe you have a cold countertop or you're using a warming mat or something, stretch and folds gives your dough a chance to kind of redistribute that heat or cold so that all of the dough is the same temperature. Speaking of temperature, I used really warm water when mixing this dough, which is why my dough started out at like 78 degrees. Now it's 76. Even though my kitchen is between 71 and 73 degrees. I like using warm water just because it speeds up the fermentation process. You can use room temperature water if you want. It just depends on how quickly you want things to go. But since I'm not doing anything special to keep this dough warm, it will drop in temperature until it probably reaches just the ambient temperature in my room. For reference, the bulk fermentation took just under 6 hours. So since it's done, it's time to go ahead and do the fun inclusion part. We're mixing our little cinnamon sugar mixture together. I'll put the ingredients and everything in the description. Here's what the dough looked like when I decided the bulk fermentation was finished. It's nice and jiggly like jello. There's bubbles all around the sides of the bowl. This is why I like to use glass bowls because you get that visual cue. You want to mist your surface with a lot of water because that's going to help it be non-stick. I needed to actually use more water. I ended up kind of like re-misting throughout the process, but I like to use water instead of flour because flour prevents the dough from sticking to itself and I end up with shaping issues. So I helped the dough out of the bowl and now it's time to stretch it out. I used like a measuring tape once just to give a point of reference and it was 13 by 16. You don't need to get that serious about it, but if you're like, I have no clue how big to make the rectangle, at least that's something to go off of, but just stretch it out until it looks about like this. We're gonna take about half of our cinnamon sugar filling and spread it out in the middle. Fold the left side to the center and kind of pinch the seams shut on the top and the bottom to keep that filling from escaping later on. Take the other side, fold it to the middle again, and we're gonna pinch that dough together. This is gonna make sure we don't get any leakage anywhere. It shouldn't leak anyway because of the bread flour in the cinnamon sugar filling. That's there because it absorbs the sugar as it liquefies. but just as a little bit of insurance, I kind of like to just pinch everything shut. So now we're going to do our roll, and this is what's gonna get you that lovely swirl. I took my time with this one because I was filming it for YouTube and wanted to make sure it came out really nice, but you don't have to be quite this slow and precise with it. Just roll the darn thing up. But I was pinching the edges shut again to prevent any potential leakage and to get a nice even oval shape. Any big air bubbles that I saw, I just kind of popped those. Air bubbles are good. We do want bubbles in the dough. That's what's going to make it light, fluffy, and airy. But if there are any huge ones, you might end up with air pockets. So if you see any massive ones appearing, just use a toothpick or a fork or a knife or something and just pop those to get them out of the way. Here at the very end, I lift up the end of the dough and stretch it. That's going to give us some surface tension because we're not really manipulating the dough much after we roll it up. And you do want to get some surface tension so you get nice oven spring later on. So by pulling it and stretching it over, it just provides a little bit of tension. Here's what it looks like in the Banneton. I know the shape of it looks kind of funky, but it will even out during the cold proof and during the baking. Nothing to worry about. Just poking a little air bubble there. By the way, this is a wood pulp Banneton with kind of like a flour sack towel. I just cover up the dough with the flour sack towel, and this goes in the fridge overnight to hang out until we bake the next day. Hello there, our loaf is ready. It's been in the fridge overnight. I love how firm the dough gets when it's wrapped in a towel. This is a wood pulp Banneton, they're my favorite kinds. And this is not a very leaky inclusion because of the bread flour and the cinnamon sugar mixture. So I'm not worried about it ruining my Banneton. My oven is preheated to 450 degrees. It's on convection. I'm trying out one of these X-Acto knives. This is the brand Fiskars, not X-Acto. But I wanna try this for scoring. Flip her over. Not loving the X-Acto. It's definitely sharp. It just drags a little bit because it's not made for this. I think a regular razor blade is a little bit better. That's all I normally do. Maybe I'll just throw in a wheat stalk for fun. Okay. I like this for decorative. I feel like you can get really precise with it. Jeez. I'm having trouble with it, actually. I liked it for the first 0.5 seconds. Now I don't like it. I feel like I just made this loaf uglier. There's a little peek at the inside. See that beautiful gluten network. Let's get this baby in the oven. This Dutch oven is from the brand Crustic, and you can get a discount with code Rebecca20. After February 15th, 2025, the discount drops a little bit and it'll be Rebecca15. Put that in there for 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll take the lid off. See what she looks like. Gosh, it just looks the same every time. I love how predictable this recipe is. Gorgeous. Going back in for like 10 minutes or so. You definitely want to keep an eye on this because the sugar will burn. So I put in the recipe 10 to 15 minutes. I've never gone as high as 15 minutes, but it just depends on your oven. So I would say check it after like 5 minutes. And if you want it a little bit more brown, push it a few more minutes. There she is. That was about 8 minutes. You can also lower the oven temperature to 425 for the uncovered part if you're worried about it burning. Literally no leaking sugar, no mess. I am in love with this. We will let that cool. It's the moment we have all been patiently waiting for. Let's cut this baby open. Oh, stunning. Oh my gosh, I wish you could smell it. This is so gorgeous. I love the swirl. The top is missing a little bit of cinnamon sugar, but in general, stunning. You can check the description for all the recipe details. I posted the full recipe on my website so you can print it out. And there's lots of tips and tricks in there. Oh my God. It's so good. Excuse me, I'm just gonna eat the rest of this bread. Just kidding, I'm gonna give it away. Happy baking.